Hi, my name is Reese. I'm a bassist and I'm the owner of the world's worst green screen setup. I am coming up to my 24th birthday next week, which is quite a coincidence because it's actually the 73-year, 7-month and 22-day anniversary of the bass guitar as we know it. Now, I wanted to take this monumental occasion to sort of dive into the history of this instrument because I think it's pretty cool. It's such a new instrument. To put it into perspective, here are some things that are older than bass guitar, and here are some things that are newer than bass guitar. I hope I've done that in the right order. Wait. To put it into perspective, here are some things that are older than bass guitar, and here are some things that are newer than bass guitar. It's first time working with a green screen, give me a break. But we're going to go way back. We're not just going to talk about since Leo Fender, but we will come to him. We're going to go back to the 1500s. So to know where bass guitar comes from, you need to understand the two main stringed instrument families in the 1500s, the violins and the viols. You'll have heard of the violins because they were way more popular, but the viols are extremely important for bass specifically. Let's talk about that. Here is, I hope, please work. Here is a table of the differences between the viols and the violins. I can just see a piece of green fabric. I know this is kind of a running bit now. I have no idea what I'm doing, but let's just see what should hopefully be behind me right now. Here's what makes up a violin. 4 strings, which are tuned in fifths, no frets, an arched back, F-shaped sound holes, played on the shoulder, and a more angled neck for a higher tension in the strings. The less popular one was the viols. They have 6 to 7 strings tuned in fourths with a third sometimes in the middle, like a viol. They have a fretted fingerboard. They have a flat back, shame, sloped shoulders and deep ribs. Now they have these C-shaped sound holes. They're played between the legs, and because of a less angled neck, there's lower tension on the strings. In the 1500s, projection was a huge problem. You'd need an instrument with high string tension, an arched back and an arched top in order to project when you're playing in an ensemble setting. Viols lacked this, they're a bit flatter. In addition, being tuned in fifths allows for easier jumps across the strings. It means that you can move up and down a lot easier instead of having to move laterally like on a bass. Imagine this is a fretboard here, right? That's good because violins generally were a bit smaller than viols. I think something that we take for granted as modern bassists is how much more expressive a fretless instrument is. Sorry to offend anyone here, but it's true. You have perfect glissando, vibrato is much more nuanced, and spiccato too, and the dynamic shaping that you can perform on the instrument sort of leaves room for some beautiful solo pieces. I mean, I don't think anyone's going to hate me if I say, even as a bassist, that a violin in a solo setting is generally more emotive than a bass guitar in a solo setting. Honestly, to summarise everything I just said, violins were just louder and more expressive. That's really what it comes down to in the end. However, the violin family lacked a satisfactory low-end instrument for ensemble playing. In a chamber environment, the cello was absolutely fine because it goes down to a C2. C2's fine for a chamber orchestra. However, in an ensemble, C2 isn't quite low enough to provide the support that's needed for that much sound. This is why viols are really important in the history of bass. Luthiers adapted the viol family into a low-end instrument for the violin family because the viols were already bigger, had lower string tension, and were more suited for playing low-end pieces. I think the key feature that was adapted from the viols was actually the tuning. The violin is a much smaller instrument than a bass guitar for obvious reasons, and as a result it doesn't really matter if you have to play a scale by going up and down the neck because the neck's only like this big. But on a bass guitar, when the neck is that long, you don't want to have to go all the way up and down the neck, which is why adapting the tuning from fourths allowed this more lateral movement across the neck to play scales, so you can keep your hand in one place and still reach all the notes you need to. And voila, we have the double bass. The changes we discussed started to appear in new instruments from around the 1700s, and they kind of finalised this form in the 1800s. If you look at a string section now, you can kind of see how the bass guitar stands out. It looks a little bit different with those viol-esque features with the sloped shoulders and the deep ribs. This is how things stayed for about 150 years. With the invention of amplifiers and microphones in the 1900s, the bass guitar... I keep saying bass guitar! With the invention of microphones and amplifiers in the 1900s, the upright bass really started to struggle because it could no longer be heard over the sound of vocals, horns, and the soon-to-be invented electric guitar. And so, in the 1930s, slap bass was invented. In one of the great ironies of musical history, slap bass was invented before the electric bass was invented. It wasn't about expressive playing yet, it was just all about audibility. By adding a percussive element to your double bass playing, you could actually be heard over horns, over a vocalist. And that was necessary at the time for the bass playing to evolve. This was particularly prominent in rockabilly music, swing music, and as a British person, I have no idea what this is, but something called Dixieland. Don't know what that is, but slap bass heavily featured in it. I'm going to play a clip now that I found on YouTube. I think you should go watch the original video just to show you how impressive this is. And it's still going on today. It's a fantastic way to play the instrument. Unfortunately, not even slap bass was enough to save the upright bass from its eventual fate. It was still way too big. I mean, if you've ever seen somebody with a cello on their back in public, it's just hard to watch. Nobody wants to see that. It still struggled to project against horns, drums, electric guitar and vocals. And it was also quite hard to learn how to play. The intonation on a big fretless instrument like that can be quite challenging, especially if you're a new player. It took people a very long time to master this instrument. And with the way that music was progressing, it needed to be made a little easier, actually. So if you can play upright bass right now, props to you. It's a very hard instrument, especially on faster passages. So 73 years ago, we're in 1951. Leo Fender has been repairing radios, he's been making guitars, and he tries his hand at making an electric bass guitar, and by doing so, he changes music for the next, I was going to say 100 years, we'll go with 73, for the next 73 years. We're not going to round up too much just yet. It's only been around 73 years, and it was a great instrument. It addressed almost all of the upright bass's problems at the time in one fell swoop. It was much more portable, it was much louder, and with the frets, you could put your finger anywhere on that fret and you'd get the perfect note every time. New players could pick this up really easily, and old players coming from upright bass could adapt very easily too. You can't understate the importance of this invention for upright bass players and for music just as a whole. Bass players could now move around on stage. They didn't need a van to transport their instrument from one place to another. The problem was, though, nobody really knew how to play the Fender P-Bass at the time when it came out. That's why old P-Basses have that little, see if I can show this to you, this little plastic block on them, like here. Because Leo Fender imagined that people would kind of hook their fingers here and then play with their thumbs, if that makes sense. By the 1960s, we had a pretty good idea of how to play it, though. That was because of two men, in my opinion, two men. Paul McCartney and James Jamerson. I bet my life savings you've heard of Paul McCartney. If you haven't heard of James Jamerson, though, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. Now, when I first listened to the music of James Jamerson, the music of Paul McCartney, I guess you could just say the Beatles or Motown, but when I first heard these guys' music, I didn't actually think it was that impressive. I was like, come on, everyone plays like this. It was only when I actually stopped being an idiot that I realised the reason that this doesn't sound as impressive now is because they were the first people to play like this. They are the reason everyone plays like this. I guarantee almost any bass line you've heard in a modern song, if it's Motown, if it's funk, even if it's just a pop song on the radio, and you go back and you listen to James Jamerson and Paul McCartney, you will see similar elements. Again, they changed this instrument forever by the way they played. All right, I've been glazing these gentlemen quite a lot. Let's talk about how they actually changed the scene. So Paul McCartney was originally a guitar player. So when he came to the instrument, he played it with a very high strap and a pick, like this. Whereas James Jamerson was initially an upright bass player. So he played with this single finger sort of hook technique like this. Because I have no idea how ad revenue works, I can't play any extracts from their tracks. But you can look at these discographies and you can think, wow, what a serious collection of music that they contributed to. By the 1970s, people were starting to push the boundaries of bass guitar playing much more. Larry Graham invented his own version of the upright bass slap technique, not for the same reasons as the upright bass players in the 30s did. He did it to try and replicate a whole band with one technique. He famously described using his thumb as like the kick drum, the pop as the snare, and he used that to create his own rhythm section within his playing. And obviously that technique has taken the world by storm. There's some great tutorials about it on YouTube if you don't know how to play slap. Really easy technique to get into, but very hard to master. We also saw Jack Up Historia slip and slide all over a fretless Fender Jazz. It's almost erotic, really. It's quite beautiful to watch. Unfortunately, something spooky started happening in the 1980s, which is that more bands were opting to have synth bass instead of a traditional bass player. Synth bass could be customised to sound however you want, and it had a greater range than a bass guitar because it was on a keyboard. The 1980s could have been dark days for the bass guitar, but Yamaha added a thick low B string to one of their instruments, creating the 5-string bass. This allowed bass players to keep up with synth because you had 5 extra notes that were lower than the traditional E string on a bass. The second thing that happened in the 80s was that companies started pumping out bass pedals like mad. There was basically a pedal to do everything, and if you're a bass player today who is into pedals and creates wacky sounds, then that's where it all started in the 1980s to try keep up with synthesizers. It kind of died down in the 90s. By the 90s we had bass players who were famous just because they were so good, not because of a band necessarily. Real virtuoso players. I think that Victor Wooten is the key example in this period. When discussing the 1980s, we talked about 5-string basses, but the 1990s is when we start to see 6-string basses, spearheaded by a player called Anthony Jackson, who worked with Paul Simon, Shaka Khan, Steely Dan. I'd like to give a special shout out to Thundercat as we start to look into the 2000s because, in my opinion, he's the best and deservedly most famous 6-string bassist of our age today. The last thing to talk about is how YouTube affected bass guitar. In 2008, Scott Devine started making YouTube videos. In 2010, Josh Fosgreen started making videos. In 2011, Davey 504 started making videos, and then in 2013, Charles Bethune started making videos. I hope I've said that right. I've always said Bethune. Either way, with these 4 gentlemen, kind of the rest is history. If you're watching this video, I'm sure that you know who they are. This leads me on to a bit of a personal anecdote, really. In 2013, I didn't really know what instrument I wanted to play, and I found myself on YouTube watching early videos from Josh Fosgreen and from Davey 504. That would be Josh Fosgreen's sort of videos when he's on a cruise ship doing a vlog, and Davey 504's early like flea bass solo videos. And the key one that I remember from Davey, which really sort of got me into bass, was 100 Amazing Bass Lines. That video is quite old now, and his channel really blew up when he started doing the wacky like 24-string, which is insane by the way, 24-string bass solo. But I remember being like 13, 14, however old I was, crowded round with my friends a computer in the music classroom at school, and we were all watching that video. We were like writing down the numbers. We were like, damn dude, no, there's no way you could play number 74. Then my friend would say to me like, nah man, I could learn it in like a month. If you give me a month, I can learn it. I think there was a lot of people of my demographic and maybe a little bit older who only got into an instrument because they saw content online and felt inspired by it. They really enjoyed it. And as a result, I think it's really important to say thank you to these people. I'm not expecting any of them to actually watch this, right? But I did get to speak to Davey 504 briefly as part of a video he did a few years ago. And I did make a point to say, hey man, thanks. Because for the last, I guess, 10 years at that point, I've been playing this instrument because of a video you made. And this instrument is a huge part of my life and always will be. So thank you. If you ever get a chance to leave like a little thank you comment on these guys' channels, I think you should. If they're anything like me, they will read all their comments and they will see it, and it'll probably mean quite a lot to them. So now I've gone through the history of bass over the last 73 years. I can't wait to see what the next 73 years bring. Now with the internet, you can share your unique take on this instrument. It's still a new instrument. It's 73 years old. I mean, we saw how influential James Jamerson was because he played upright bass before. We saw how influential Paul McCartney was because he played guitar before. There's probably something unique about you which you can bring to this instrument and you can share with millions of people online. So I think that the future of bass guitar is on the internet, and well, arguably the future of any instrument is on the internet. If you have a talent, you should share it. I didn't mean for this to turn into a little speech at the end here, but I think that going forward, bass can be anything you want it to be. If I didn't talk about a bass player who you really resonate with today, I apologise. But going forward, you can be that person. You can create your own style on this instrument. Okay, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Goodbye.